Well, hello again. This time we are going to do a little bit of a deep dive into the new sky filter or cloud generation system. These are volumetric clouds, and you may have seen this little animation that we posted maybe 2 weeks ago on the YouTube channel. And so this is straight render out of Howler. And one thing I want to do is just have you explore some of the things with me here. I mean, we could go straight into filter, render, sky, and then dibble dabble with this, look around a little bit, change some parameters like the time, and you see the sun is setting and the colors change. We can do a couple of things here: thickness, cloud coverage, different algorithms for calculating the distribution of these clouds, that sort of things. One thing I want to do though is before we actually go in here, because when you click that, and you'll see in the upper right corner, there will be sort of a progress bar. That may take a while to render, and that really depends on your GPU, your CPU memory, also the speed of the memory. So there's a number of factors that can make this a little bit slow at first. And so one thing I would recommend is you create a very small version initially as you experiment with the parameters first. So let's say, for example, we resample this down to really small, like even not smaller than 320 by 240. You could go down to 200 or so. And then you can zoom in, and of course it may be a little bit blocky at times, but at least it will be much faster to experiment with, especially if you do a animation from that, right? So I'm going to clear this, and I'm going to create an animation, and I'm going to say I want something like 200 or 300 frames. So it's a fairly short animation, maybe 10 seconds if you play it at about 20 something frames per second. And here we go. I'm going to store this animation so we can easily get back to it or something similar. Although the filter is overriding or replacing things, so we can also just take the existing one and just render it again over it. So let's go and render the first one here. Let's go and render sky. And simply taking the default parameters, or maybe we clear here to make sure we don't have a prior set of parameters. Let's just use render sky, and so now this is what I remember from the default orientation. And I'm just curious in which direction these clouds are moving if we don't change anything. So I'm going to go click animate, and I'm going to not change anything here, especially the speed in the X, Y, and Z directions, not going to touch them. You see there's a little bit of a X direction, there's a little bit less in the Y direction, and there is a little bit also even less in the Z direction. And we'll want to explore and understand in which direction are we looking, and relative to that, which one is affecting the movement in which direction. So let's click OK, and you can see they're mostly moving to the right. Pretty much. So in this default orientation, I think we're looking towards the west, and the time you see is noon. So the sun is right above us, and if I were to change the time to go like 1 p.m. or 13 hours, 14, 15, 16, and so on in the 24-hour system, it would be going. Eventually, we'll see the sun coming down here. So it's setting in the west. That's sort of the default setting you want to look at, and we don't have to wait for this to complete. We can say maybe close that, maybe close this, and see what that looks like. And then, so one thing you notice when it's now playing back a little bit faster, there's more to it than just the clouds moving sideways, right? They're also changing shapes, it looks like. Okay, we didn't render the whole animation, so there's a couple of empty frames. But what you do notice is that there is definitely some change in density or position of these clouds, and that's an interesting one that we want to explore to make it more realistic, right? And there's actually also a little bit of a direction. It doesn't just go exactly sideways, and that's a bit difficult to see in this case because it's a small amount. So let's go do that again. And actually, before we do that, let's just store this one here because we might want to go back and compare. So let's store this animation to disk. It's fast enough. I have a SSD drive. We didn't really need this one. So let's go close that and store, and render again. And this time with the sky. What we'll do now is we'll go and change the direction. So the speed is x, it was 0.7. That's probably the one that has the fastest component. So it's probably taking it from left to right. And to test that theory, I'm going to make this one here 0, and I'm going to make this one 0 as well. So we have just the x-axis, which probably, my guess, is going from left to right. And let's go see that. Yep, so still doing about the same thing in terms of main direction, main movement, but you see now the clouds are not changing shapes. So evidently one of the other parameters, y or z, is what helps change the appearance of the shape of these clouds. And so let's stop that and go and close this again. In fact, this time we'll just go straight here again. And instead of going sideways with 0.07, I'll put that one to 0, and I'll keep it 0 on the y-axis, and I will make it 1.5, maybe a little bit bigger, like 0.004 in the z-axis. And what that does is it looks like it's moving towards us now. So maybe if we wanted them to go in the far away, we could have a negative 0.04, and that would move it the other direction. So let's try that. We'll go with negative value here. And maybe a little bit faster. Let's say we want to go, there you go, and go. So now these clouds indeed are moving away from us. Right, so that's one thing to understand, is which way does it move if you have some value for the x-axis direction and the z-axis, right? There is one more parameter we haven't used yet, and that's the y-axis. So I'm going to go with that one now. I'm going to give it about 0.2 or 3. No movement in the x, no movement in the z-axis, so 0 here too. And just a little bit on the y-axis, and observe what happens in that case. It looks like something's moving, and you might think they're moving away or somewhere, and it might even look like they're moving up or down. And that's kind of actually what's doing is it's kind of a vertical movement, but as it's doing so, it's actually encountering spaces of more density or less density for these volumetric clouds. And so that's what allows us to make it look like they're changing shapes. And what you want to do is not have this just by itself. You want to also have a little bit of movement sideways or closer or farther away, and combine the two together. So let's do that. I'm going to go back. Let's actually clear this so that we go back to the original initial settings, render sky. And now we can go animate. And so we'll keep it at 0.07. That's the default. Maybe we'll go a little bit farther away as well. So we'll go negative. Come on, there you go. What? Speed, why is it not accepting that? I thought it should. There you go. Oh, maybe there's a limit on, oh yeah, look at that. There's a limit on how many digits you can put in here. So when I had a 3.5 here, right, and nothing here in front of it, the 3.5, but I cannot give it another. That's it. Okay, we just found a little bug. Well, not really a bug, maybe just a limit. We could add another digit here, I suppose, but I have no idea if the algorithm really cares about that level of extra precision. So let's go and just keep it at about 0.005 and make it a negative value. There you go. And the speed at which the clouds are changing, I don't want them to change too fast, but I still want a little bit. So I'm going to keep it at 0.02 and go. So now if you look at some of these clouds as you follow them, you can tell that they are changing shapes, and it looks a little bit more realistic. And that's the whole goal about this, right? Now, there's a couple of other parameters that we will want to explore, and we'll do that in another tutorial. Another video, we'll go through each of those parameters to kind of get a sense of how you might want to use them. So finally, on this one here, what I want to do is once I've decided which way I want the clouds to move, at what speed I want them to changing the shape and their position and all that. One thing I want to do, of course, is do a rendering at a little bit higher resolution. So what I'll do is I'll create a new image as the base holder. Let's say, for example, I wanted something like 720 by or 800 by 600 or something like that, super VGA, not the super highest resolution these days anymore, but it's a good one to work with nonetheless. And go and create an animation here. Let's say we wanted indeed 345 frames. There it is, 473 megabytes needed. And go and render that under the filter, render sky. And so let's say we wanted to keep turbulence, a little bit more cloud coverage, a little bit higher cloud. And then there's also a parameter here, absorption, and you could give it a little bit more phase. So higher contrast that way, in a way. Sun glare, that's if you see the sun. Now, right now the sun is not visible, but if I increase the time, the sun will appear back there. There you go. So the sun glare now, you could make it pretty big if you wanted to make it look like a really big sunset appearance. So maybe even here when it's getting a bit into the orange or reddish color. The fog distance we can increase too. That will take extra time to render, but if that's what we want, that's what we'll do. Also, I may not want to see the bottom line of the cloud, so maybe I'll just use the mouse here to move it down a little bit. And if this aspect ratio is the same as this here in my main view, it would be a match. But I think I have a little bit more vertical direction here, so I may need to even go down further. It doesn't matter so much. I could change the scale of the clouds here. I could go iterations, a couple of things to try, but most importantly, I'm going to go and animate that now. And with the animation, you can even change some of the parameters here. Right? You can have it go, perhaps the sun might be setting down a little bit or rising. So you could go a little bit up from this to that value. You have cloud coverage. Maybe you want that to reduce over time. And the thickness, also reduce that. But most importantly now, if we remember what directions we wanted for these clouds movement, that's what we will do. Now, in this case here, what I want them is simply to disappear towards the far distance, or to the contrary, have them come to me. So I'm going to go and give it 0 on X. Remember that. Z, I'm going to give it a little bit faster speed, faster movement here. Let's say 0.04, and still a decent amount of change. I think I'll just leave it at that and go. And so now you can see the progress bar up here is taking its time, and really if you have a fairly new computer, especially a high-end graphics card or very fast RAM and a lot of other parameters that help speed it up, that will be certainly a blessing. But even if it's on a relatively slow computer, you can render this overnight. But make sure you first test it and experiment with it at small resolutions. Then that way you get through that exploration phase much faster. And by the time you decided, okay, now I can go, it's probably time to have dinner and go to bed. And next morning, it's all rendered and ready to go. All right. Thanks for watching. And we'll do more on the new sky filter in the coming days.